cool. That is very cool. Oh, there, Douglas. All right, I'm kind of host the meeting here. All right. All right. Wait for people to show up. Whoa, it's recording. I believe it's not supposed to record yet. It's recording right now, but I'm going to pause it for a moment. Let me just say thank you all so much for being a part of this session as we're learning more about Moravian history and theology together. We are very honored, and I know I'm very pleased to have Riddick, Reverend Dr. Riddick Weber with us. I would just say I've had a chance to know Riddick for a number of years. Back in the early 80s when I was in seminary, I had an opportunity to spend the summer at Friedberg Moravian. That's where he and his family were attending, so I got to know him as a young person. Through the years, kind of our paths have crossed. I think most recently, in more recent years, it's been at summer camp at Law Ridge, where he's just been a wonderful counselor to the young people there. 5 years ago, when we took a group of young adults to the Czech Republic and Germany, Riddick was with another group, but then when he finished with that group, he joined ours and was just a very special part of that is he was able to talk about Moravian history where we were there in the Czech Republic and at Herrenhut, Germany. So I know I'm certainly very grateful for what Riddick has already shared. I'm looking forward to what he's doing now. What I'd like to do, just to kind of have some familiarity with Riddick, and so I hope you read the part in our survey. We had some of his background. I did not realize that at one time he was the interim pastor at King Moravian. So some of you may have already met him, which is wonderful. But I'll tell you, why don't we just kind of go around. If you don't mind, I'm just going to call out names that are on my screen. And if you will, unmute yourself and just say who you are, how long you've been a member at King Moravian, and what you hope to get out of this session, the sessions that we do. So I'm looking at my screen. I'm kind of going to go around the top and around. So Andy, I've got you up in my upper left-hand corner. If you don't mind starting, I'll just call names from there.
Andy Sales. I've been a member of King Moravian a little over 16 years. What else was I supposed to say? Is that it?
What are you looking forward to getting out of the session tonight and the weeks to come?
Any knowledge of Moravian history or just anything Moravian is just what I'm looking for. I'm new. I feel like I'm new to still new to it. So okay. It's just a great opportunity to learn.
Okay, thank you. Dottie.
Hey, Dottie Jones. I've been a member of King Moravian Church all of my life, and I will be 64 next month. My parents were members, my grandparents were members, and just I am looking forward to this to reconnect with my Moravian history and to reconnect with my church family.
Okay, all right, thank you. Paula.
My name is Paula Jennings. I've been a member for about 10 years at King Moravian, and I really don't know a lot about Moravian history or the Moravian church, so I just want to learn more.
Okay, great. How about you, Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Donnelly, and I think I've been a member at King Moravian about 5 years. Just shortly before Doug started. I can't remember how long you've been with us. But anyway, I also would just like to learn more about Moravian history. It's so interesting. And since I didn't grow up and haven't been in the Moravian church very long, I just thought this would be a good opportunity for me.
Okay, well, thank you. Mark and Heather.
Heather Johnson. I think Mark and I have been at King Moravian 5 or 6 years. I'm not sure exactly. yeah, like Mark said, I went to kindergarten with Riddick at Freeburg Moravian, but that's really that part, I guess. And I worked at Mrs. Haynes' cookie factory with they're all Moravian there, so I guess I have a little bit of that background, but nothing much. Forward to hearing, learning more about Moravian faith. Yes.
And I have, I've been one of the few people, I guess, that have really enjoyed the Zoom meetings. I've learned more probably in the last year than I have in the last 10, because we've been involved in Zoom book meetings, Bible studies, exactly. And since we claim the Moravian Church, our home church, we really want to learn more and more about Moravian history.
Okay, thank you. And you're also involved in a Zoom choir performance. That was pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Virginia.
I'm Virginia Southern. I have been a member of King Moravian since about 1983. I love Moravian history. I worked at Old Salem as a docent for a year and dressed up in the Moravian costume and learned quite a bit when we had in-service days. And when you were here several years ago, I really enjoyed your sermons. And so I thought I would enjoy this again. And it's my husband, Tom, who knew your mother in high school.
All right, thank you. CW. Oh, I think, don't hear you there.
Turn your mic on.
CW, I think you might be muted.
Unmute.
Unless you're wanting us to read lips. There you go.
Now?
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
A little?
Just,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm at the office. It's why you see that funny number down in the lower left corner. And but I have been interested in Moravian history for a good number of years. I've only been a member of King Moravian not quite a year. So I'm wanting to just learn as much as I possibly can through this series.
Okay, thank you. Grant and Rachel. I can't hear you yet, Rachel. No, not yet. I tell you, we'll come back, Dusty, and I think you got somebody in your background.
Oh,
Unmute yourself.
You're muted, Dusty.
Yes, Don and I, well, I've been a member at King for 39 years, and I just thought it would be very interesting to hear this. I know some, but not enough that I've remembered that I could even repeat anything. So I just wanted to learn again.
Okay, thank you. And there's some faces I don't see, but I see Holly Mathis, and I saw her a little bit earlier. Holly?
I've been a King Moravian pretty much all my life, and just wanted to learn as much as possible. I feel like I know a little bit, but every time I hear it, it kind of sticks a little bit better. So
Turn on your video.
no.
All right. And I see a cook there. I'm hoping that's Roger. Roger, if you want to unmute yourself. Or is that something I can do from here?
You can.
Okay, let's see.
I think
Hang on.
so.
the host can.
Here we go. I think We'll come back to Roger. Well, here we go.
Oh.
Roger?
Yeah.
Oh, there's Paula.
Well, we'll go. Paula, we'll just go to you. We'll come back to Roger.
I'm quite the expert on Zoom because I use it every day now. I have been a member for almost 25 years. In February to be 25 years. And I learned very early from Jessie Stone and Miss Marietta Gentry that you're never too old to learn. So thank you, Riddick Weber, for offering to do this. We're excited to hear what you got to say.
Great. Who is that young man beside you? That's not Kip. Would that be Dean? Yay. All right. Awesome. Yeah. Good to see you. Let's see. Rachel, we'll come back to you and Grant. We got any sound from you?
I don't hear Roger.
Not getting any sound. We'll Roger, how about you? Not getting sound either. Well, I tell you, we'll go ahead and head on. Maybe there'll be opportunities later. Before I turn it over to Riddick, what I'd like to do, let's just have a prayer together. Ask God to bless what we're going to be doing. Lord, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to meet in this very special way. Certainly thank you, Lord, for the homes that we are coming from this evening, and bless each of our homes. Please bless our church home and our church family. Thank you, Lord, for the many ways what we try to do to serve you and to learn more about you. And thank you, Lord, for this very special study we begin tonight. I especially want to thank you for your servant Riddick and all that you have already blessed him with, the knowledge, the wisdom you have given him, and certainly what he does for our seminarians, what he has done, the many lives he has already touched. I pray, Lord, that through his words tonight and the weeks ahead, that our lives can also be touched as well. And may we thank you so much, Lord, not only for our church family at King Moravian, but even the greater Moravian Church and the many ways that you have been at work in it and have moved through it. Just we ask your blessings to be upon us, and certainly bless Riddick. For these things I ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Riddick, turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Doug. And thanks for that prayer of blessing and wisdom and your lips to God's ears. So hopefully some of the things I say tonight will make sense. And I just want to say it's good to see some familiar faces. Like I said, I've known Heather since kindergarten, known Doug for quite a while. So there's that Friedberg connection there. But I am really grateful for my King connection, having the opportunity to be there in the summer of 2010. And since Virginia mentioned those sermons, that was a sermon series that just sort of happened to take place because of the lectionary. And I still use some of that stuff in one of the courses that I teach in particular. There were some things that I thought about with King and the situation that y'all were in at the time that I'd never thought about before. And it really sort of stuck with me. So I'm really grateful for my time at King. It's nice to see those familiar faces from my time there. But I was also glad to hear, several people have joined since then. I mean, that's a great sign of a healthy, growing church. And so especially want to say, looking forward to sharing stuff with those who are really new to the Moravian Church. And in light of that, I want to say the stuff that I'm going to be sharing over the next 4 weeks is normally the kind of stuff that we dig into over 39 hours of graduate school education. So, I'm trying to narrow that down and pick out the stuff that I think is most important. And sometimes because of that, it's kind of easy to get down in the weeds of stuff. And if I'm saying stuff that doesn't make sense, just jump in and go, wait a minute, back up a minute and talk a little bit more about that. So, feel free to interrupt me. And if you've got questions, feel free to post those in the chat. I'll be trying to look at those. I'm going to be sharing some PowerPoint slides and also just sort of talking like this. So most of you who are familiar with Zoom know that you can put on sort of a speaker view if you'd like to do that. And you can also adjust how much of the PowerPoint you see and how much of a face you see. And not that people would want to see my face that much, but you may just need some variety if I've got a PowerPoint slide that's been up there. So feel free to adjust those kinds of things as you need. I will be making the PowerPoints available. So I know Doug's recording this. If you email those recordings out to folks, that PowerPoint, you can just email out to folks too as well. So, don't feel like you got to jot down every word, because I'll have outlines that hopefully will be relatively easy to follow. And like I said, feel free to jump in kind of at any minute. And I also want to say just thanks to Doug for the opportunity to do this. This is something that Zoom Zoom is making possible that a year ago none of us would really have even thought much about. We sort of, around here, we talk about COVID silver linings. And this is kind of a COVID silver lining. So many churches have so many people that are used to Zoom now and have access to Zoom. So I've been doing some stuff like this with Raleigh Moravian Church. It's been really fun to work with them. And, Craig Troutman, I just finished up the second series that I've done with them. And they said, if it would ever be interesting to have like folks from Raleigh and folks from King together to do something like that, just to get to meet some people from different places and look at some things together. So like I said, thanks to Doug for setting this up. Thanks to you guys for joining. I'm really looking forward to being able to share some stuff with you, and really interested in the questions that you've got coming back. Because to me, the most important thing is that y'all understand stuff. Not that I say stuff, but that y'all understand stuff. So feel free to ask those questions as they arise. Also want to note that the things that I'm talking about, let me see if I can share screen right quick. So Doug, I think you probably as the host need to go on, and at the share screen green button at the bottom,
Okay.
there's a way that like if you look beside that, it'll give you the options to let more than one person share. There's probably like a little hash mark there that you can click.
Okay, it says multiple participants can share simultaneously. Is that what
If you'll click that, that would be great.
It is clicked. Okay.
Wonderful. Oops. All right, so hopefully everybody's seeing a big screen now. And like I said, thanks to Doug and everybody. And I also want to give credit where credit's due. So we've had a lot of people who've done a lot of writing, and I'm sort of distilling a lot of their works. The big definitive history on the Moravian Church since 1700. And we're going to get to that in 2 weeks. But that's sort of the history book that most Moravians know of. It's a book by Taylor and Kenneth Hamilton. And they were a father and son historian team. Art Freeman was a professor at the seminary for quite a long time. And he did a lot of work in sort of from 1970 on, helping people see Zinzendorf in a new light. And he presented Zinzendorf in some ways that's kind of different than what the Hamiltons talk about. And so I'm going to be drawing from some of his work. Daniel Cruz, who's the retired archivist from the Southern Province, has done a lot of work not only on the history of the Southern Province, but also on the history of the Moravian Church in the Czech Republic. And so I'm going to be drawing on a lot of his work. Craig Atwood is currently a professor here at the seminary. He's published a lot of stuff that I'll be drawing from some of his takes. He was my dissertation advisor, so he's really influenced a lot of my approaches to things within Moravian history. Jan Beutler is the current Unity administrator. So he's like the chief executive or chief administrator of the Moravian Church throughout the world. And he was a former missionary to Tanzania. He's currently the pastor of the Moravian Church in Christiansfeld in Denmark. And he does all this unity work on top of being a local church pastor. And he's presented some new ways of thinking about the Moravian Church from 1957 on. And we'll get to that the last session. But like I said, all these people have influenced the work that I do. And some of the PowerPoints that I'm going to be sharing over the next couple of weeks, I've had an opportunity to work with as I've shared lectures with the Moravian Church in Cuba. I've actually gotten to go visit there twice, and that's been a really, really neat experience. And also, like I said, I've been working with Raleigh Moravian Church. So all these previous experiences sort of go into what I'm about to share with you guys over the next couple of weeks. So I want to share the framework. I want to share the framework of what I'm hoping to do. And most of us, if we grew up within the Moravian Church, we heard the idea of in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, and in all things love. And that's sort of our motto. If you grew up Moravian, you've heard that a lot. Hopefully, if you've joined the Moravian Church recently, that's a phrase that you've heard. And what I want to talk about, especially over the next two times we're together, is why we have the concept of the essentials. And why we have them is in some ways just as important as what those essentials actually are. Because why we have them really influenced what they are. So we're going to talk about sort of historically why we have the concept of the essentials. And then we're going to talk about what those essentials actually are. And then we're going to talk about two concepts that are related to the essentials, and those are called the ministerials and incidentals. And we'll get to that. But the key thing is to know what those essentials are. And then we're going to look at some other theological themes that Moravians have thought to be important over time. Because this concept of the essentials, as we're going to get into tonight, is something that people thought of about 500 years ago. And then over time, we moved away from those. And so we're going to look at some other theological emphases that we had that were sort of different, but also related to and pretty congruent with the essentials, even though we didn't use that framework. Then in our last time together, we're going to get back into why we're talking about these essentials again, why we're using that theological framework. And we're going to ask that question, is this concept still a helpful concept for us as Moravians? Is it a good thing to help us as a church think about how we're going to sort of live and work and do the ministry that Christ calls us to do? So are the essentials still a helpful concept? So that's the framework. Why do we have the essentials? What are the essentials? What sort of things have we talked about in addition to the essentials? Why are we sort of circling back to them? And are the essentials helpful? So the essentials, before we talk about what they are, I want to describe them a little bit. And churches maintain the essentials and vice versa. So the essentials, when we're doing the essentials, when we believe the essentials, when we live out the essentials, then we're really being a church. And it's the church's job to make sure that people know the essentials and are living in accordance with those essentials. And if we ever need to change anything, we want to make sure that we're changing things in such a way that we actually maintain the essentials so that the essentials remain essential. So churches maintain essentials and essentials maintain churches. Without the essentials, a church is not really a church in a Moravian understanding. So without the essentials, a church isn't really a church. But with the essentials, any church that has these essentials is a church, even if it looks very different from other churches. And we'll sort of talk about sort of how that can be, because we're going to use some other categories to define those things that make churches different from one another. So without the essentials, a church isn't a church. But if a church has the essentials, it's a church, even if it looks different from other churches. And if you have only the essentials, you're a Christian. That's sort of the broadest basic definition we can give. You know, if you've got the essentials, you're a Christian. But it's the non-essentials that sort of make you a Baptist or a Moravian or a Catholic or a Lutheran or Assemblies of God or whatever. It's those non-essential things that help us sort of understand what kind of Christian we are. But if we're a Christian, it's those essential things that make us Christians. So it's important to note, not all Christians would agree with this approach. And I'm going to give some specific examples of that as we sort of talk a little further. So not all Christians agree with this Moravian approach to defining the things that are truly important. Because many Christians would say that certain things are essential that we say are non-essential. And like I said, I'll give some specific examples as we sort of talk through these categories a little more. Okay. Now, having said that, I'm wondering if people have questions or comments so far. Because like I said, sort of want to get us all on the same page so we know where we're going before we get started. But are there questions or comments so far?
My question would be coming up later. What is essential?
We're going to get to that.
Exactly.
Right. We're going to get to those essentials. And once again, for me, it's important to lay the background for why we even have something called essentials before we get to those. But I promise you, by the end of the evening, you'll be able to know, recite, and love the essentials. And the good thing is there's only 2 of them that have 3 parts. So it's kind of easy once we get there. Any other questions or comments before I move on? All right. So what we're going to be doing over the next 4 weeks is we're going to be covering about 600 years of history. And to help us do that, I'm going to show a color-coded timeline. And for those of you who remember your science and the Roy G. Biv thing, so what I'm doing is the red stuff is the earliest stuff, and the blue, indigo, and violet stuff, that's the newer stuff. All right. So like I said, I've got it color-coded, and I've tried to make the headlines on all the PowerPoint slides I've made have this sort of color coding. So it helps us sort of put names in their proper historical sequence, okay? So I'm getting ready to share screen again, and I'm gonna show you sort of the timeline that we're working with, all right? So, try to move that out of the way to start with, okay? So red, okay? Sort of the reddest we can get as Christians is to go back to Jesus. And we're not going all the way back to Jesus, although we'll talk about Jesus some. But that's, like I said, sort of that's as far back as you can get. And it's important to note that after Jesus, the church has had a lot of reforming movements. The church has grown and changed and changed in a lot of different ways. And sometimes people aren't happy with those changes, so they try to make some other changes. And the church has been doing this for a long time, all right? And then you see this name in red here, John Huss. And we're going to spend some time talking about him. He is sort of the spiritual ancestor of the Moravian Church, although he himself was not a Moravian. He was Catholic, but he called for reform within Catholicism. And the church, the Catholic Church, said, we don't like your ideas. All right. So we'll talk about what happened after that. And then there were followers of his called the Hussites. And then certain followers within those Hussites founded the Unitas Fratrum. And that's the Latin name for the church that we're a part of. We just call it the Moravian Church here in America. But sort of the official international name is the Unitas Fratrum. It means the unity of the brothers and sisters. So then we're going to keep going, and we're going to talk about the name of Lucas of Prague. And even a lot of long-term Moravians don't know this name, And it's probably the most important name that most Moravians don't know. And we're going to talk tonight about why he's so important, because he's the one that actually came up with the idea of the essentials. So, like I said, that's a really important name. And you see his dates there. He lived in the late 1400s to the early 1500s. And like I said, he's the one that came up with the idea of the essentials. So we'll be talking about him. A lot of Moravians know the name of Comenius, and a lot of education scholars know the name of Comenius. And you see his dates there. We're going to spend a lot of time in 2 weeks talking about Zinzendorf, who lived from 1700 to 1760. And it's during his lifetime that this Unitas Fratrum went through a rebirth. And it was during this time that these followers first came to North America and actually made it to North Carolina in 1753. And so we're going to be talking about the kind of things that Zinzendorf and the Moravians of his day believed, some of these things you might find sort of surprising because we don't talk about them very often. We'll talk about some of the practices they had that we might find a little unusual. And then we're going to talk about the Moravians after the Zinzendorfs. Because after Zinzendorf died, there was a period where the Moravian Church underwent some changes, and that period sort of lasts until about 1900. Our last time together, we're going to focus on the 20th century. And we're going to talk about some important events that happened in 1957 and sort of what they set the tone for in terms of leading us back to this discussion of what are the essentials. So that's our time frame that we're working with. Like I said, we're covering about 600 years, and we're really starting with John Huss and ending up with where we are today with this question of, are the essentials helpful for us still? All right, this is sort of another way of looking at that timeline. I've got those dates across the top, 1415 all the way sort of to 1995, sort of the last big theological change statement that the Moravians have made. And you see those dates sort of listed by century. So I'm going to talk about a couple things in the 1400s, a lot of things in the 1500s. There's only one date listed there, but that's where a lot of the key concepts we're going to be talking about actually were developed. Some things in the 1600s, the 1700s. We're going to skip the 1800s completely, and then we're going to talk about some important events in the 20th century. Okay. So like I said, one of the most important names that most Moravians should know but don't is the name of Luke of Prague. And so we're going to start out with him. And he had this idea about the essentials, which makes sense. And then a word called ministerials. And this is a word I think we need to change because it's not like a regular English word and it doesn't make sense to most people. And I'm actually going to propose a new name for us to use with that a little bit later on. And then something called the incidentals. And the incidentals are things that can change by incident, right? So that's where that word comes from. Essentials never change. Incidents can change by incident, depending on what the need at any particular time is. And then that word ministerial that's in the middle, minister comes from a Latin word that means to serve. We may not think about that when we think about ministers in sort of an American Protestant sense. You know, Doug's your minister. He's your pastor. We think of Doug being a servant in some ways, but that's not the way we typically use it. But if you think about like the British Prime Minister, he's the most important public servant. So that's where that servant root for minister is. And the ministerials are things that serve the essentials. The ministerials help us understand the essentials. The ministerials tell us about the essentials, okay? So that's that three-part distinction that Luke of Prague thought of called essentials, ministerials, and incidentals. Now, what the essentials did was help the Unitas Fratrum, those are our spiritual ancestors, explain why they rejected some parts of Catholicism and not others. So if something's essential, you're not going to reject it. If something's not essential, you might reject it. So like I said, this idea of essentials helped Lucas of Prague explain why the Unitas Fratrum rejected some parts of Catholicism and not others. It also explained why they could work with other Protestant churches but still stay separate from them. So you saw that Lucas of Prague died in 1528. For folks who know some stuff about their Protestant church history, you probably know about Martin Luther, and you know about his nailing the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door, and he did that in 1517. So this means that there were other Protestant people starting to emerge, like Lutherans, and people who became what we know as the Presbyterian Church now, the Reformed churches. And so this concept explained why they could work with these other Protestant churches, but stay separate from them because there were some things that they disagreed on, even though they agreed about the essentials. It explained why you could change some of the beliefs and practices even of their own church. So the Unitas Fratrum in the time of Luke of Prague underwent some changes. And how are they going to explain the changes they went through? Well, this system helped them do that. So the essentials then are things that are essential to Christian faith. Ministerial means that they serve the parts of Christian faith. And like I said, we'll come back to it. And incidentals means it can vary by incident. All right. So Luke of Prague believed that most of the conflict in the church is caused when we don't recognize what's truly essential. We fight over silly things like the color of the church carpet, or, do we need to get a new sound system? Or, what are we going to do about fixing the, accessibility ramp or things like this? Those may be important, but they're not essential. But these are the kinds of things that churches may fight over. Or how do you baptize somebody? Do they have to be dunked in a river, or can you sprinkle them on the head with the water? Does somebody have to be an adult? Can they be a child and be baptized? So you're probably well aware that a lot of church fights are over these kinds of things. But Luke of Prague said those things really aren't the essentials. And we need to pay attention to the essentials and not argue about these other things. Yep. So our church has often been able to work with other churches because we have not made our doctrine essential, or a particular way of doing a ritual essential. So like I said, we're happy to have people join our church who've been baptized as babies. We're happy to have people join our church who were baptized as adults. We're happy to baptize adults if they've never been baptized before. And we practice infant baptism. The way you're baptized is not essential to us. Okay, so that's part of how we're able to work with other churches when sometimes other churches wind up in fights. All right, so I want to say a little bit about who founded the Unitas Fratrum, who they were, what they believed. And then, like I said, we're going to get into the fact that they changed some of their beliefs. And the fact that they changed some of their beliefs is part of why they developed this idea of the essentials. And I see, okay. So one of the questions is, was Luke of Prague an educated man? All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Yes, Luke of Prague was a well-educated man, and that's actually one of the big changes that happened within the Moravian Church. Because initially there was the thought that, universities are in big cities, and big cities are places that are these dens of iniquity and all sorts of wickedness, and we don't want to be hanging out in those kinds of places. So initially there was kind of a fear of education. But Lucas of Prague argued, no, this is a really good thing. And that's one of the changes he made, saying, yes, we should value an education. And part of what he had to explain is, how can we change our mind? We used to say education was a problem, and now we're saying it's a good thing. How can we justify that change? So that's one of those changes that led to the idea of the essentials. So any other questions before I go in and dive a little more deeply into the founding of the Unitas Fratrum? All right, either stunned silence, or I'm such an amazing teacher that everybody's still right with me. So I'm hoping it's the second rather than the first. So like I said, feel free to jump in, shoot messages, or shoot me questions in the text, or just break right in. All right. So like I said, so what we've got so far is this idea that they're essentials. There are these things called ministerials, and like I said, I'm going to argue that I wish we'd call them something else, and things like incidentals, all right? So we're going to go back and see the earliest theological beliefs, and then we're going to look at sort of why they changed, and then why we got to the essentials. So I'm going to go back to my screen sharing now. All right. All right, so I've mentioned this name, John Huss. Okay, you see his dates there. He lived from 1369, we think. We don't have that exactly, but that's sort of our best guess. And he was executed in 1415. And every year, around July 6th, we celebrate the martyrdom of John Huss, the fact that he was willing to die for his faith. John Huss was a Czech. He spoke Czech. He was a Czech person. He himself was from a humble background. He was born at a place that now is like an hour-and-a-half drive south of Prague. And that's with modern buses on modern highways. So if you think about that, that means he was out in the sticks in his day. And he, just a simple, humble man who was drawn to the priesthood. And he became a Roman Catholic priest. And not only did he become a priest, but he was a very smart person who took advantage of the opportunities he had. And he essentially became the president of the University of Prague. And at that time, Prague was a very, very important political center in Europe. And he became the preacher at a place called the Bethlehem Chapel. And one of the neat things about the Bethlehem Chapel was he didn't found it. It had been founded by sort of people a generation ahead of him. But they preached in Czech in the Bethlehem Chapel, which was unusual because most Catholic worship happened only in Latin. But the people who lived in Prague, and these people who had been working at the university before John Huss got there, they were reformers themselves, and they influenced Huss. And so Huss was able to sort of step into this reforming tradition, and he was able to preach at Bethlehem Chapel in Czech. They sang hymns in Czech, and the hymns would be written on the wall so people could read those. And he had a wide audience, including the local queen was a very big follower of John Huss and really liked him a lot. And for a while, I really should say the empress. So a very, very important person. And for a while, the emperor actually liked John Huss too, but that changed. So you see John Huss, you see his years. That's what I'm saying. We're talking about things that happened 600 years ago. He was a Czech I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time, but just to say that his followers used some of the things that he developed about language to be able to translate the Bible into Czech. And the Czech Bible had a similar influence on the Czech language like the King James Bible had on the English language. So there are a lot of English words and phrases that we use today as being very common that were actually like invented and used for the first time in the King James Bible to make sense of biblical words in English. John Huss and his followers did the same thing for the Czech language. Here are the big things that Huss preached about. He said that the Bible should be in the language of the people. And like I said, in his day, that was not the case. Worship had started being in the language of the people in that part of the Czech Republic. But he said that should be the case everywhere, and not just worship, but language. So that, I mean, the Bible as well. So that anybody that could read should be able to read the Bible for themselves. He also argued that people should take both bread and wine at communion. In his day, that did not happen. The clergy folks, they got bread and wine, but laity, the people who weren't ordained, the people who weren't the priests, they only got the bread. And he thought that that sort of created sort of a two-tier system where the laity were sort of second-class Christians. And he really argued that everybody should take both bread and wine at communion. He also argued for the reform of the clergy. Because a lot of clergy had figured out ways to use their positions to make them rich. And if you're not a fan of televangelists, it's sort of the same kind of thing for people who, you know, will ask their followers to help them buy a new jet when they may have trouble putting bread on the table. The same thing was happening in the Middle Ages, where people were being asked to tithe and pay taxes to the church and making sort of clergy better off when the laity were really struggling. And he argued that the Bible, rather than the Pope, is the ultimate authority within the church. So these are the reforms that Huss was pushing for: Bible and worship in the language of the people. The laity should have both bread and wine. Clergy should live simple, moral lives, and the Bible is the authority. All right, so a lot of people did not like Huss's reforms. And so he was executed, as I already said, in 1415. He was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. So he was kicked out of the Catholic Church. And then he was turned over to the civil authorities to be burned at the stake. So it's important to note that even though Moravians look back to John Huss was not a Moravian. He lived all his life as a Catholic and would have died a Catholic, except the church kicked him out, okay? But his ideas inspired people who started the Moravian Church. So the people of the Czech Republic loved John Huss. And when they heard he'd been executed, when they heard that he had been executed, they started going into rebellion. And the Holy Roman Empire fought back, and the Czech people were able to hold them off. And this was an amazing, amazing feat. The Czech people held at bay the most powerful empire in Europe. And unfortunately, what happened is within the followers of John Huss, they started fighting among themselves. And I won't go into all the details of this, but within about 20 years after this, after the death of John Huss, there was a group called the Utraquists that emerged as the leading voice of the Czech people. And Utraquist, it's a Latin name, and it really means communion in both kinds. So that reform that Huss had argued for, about the laity receiving the bread and the wine, That's what that name really means. So the people who want the bread and the wine, they're the ones who sort of win this Czech civil war that followed their wars with the Holy Roman Empire. All right, so, okay. After things settled down a little bit, there's some followers of Huss who began to sort of live into this new normal where there's this group called the Utraquists that are in control in the Czech Republic. And one of them actually becomes an archbishop. There's another one who's a very simple man, but argues for pacifism. And we'll come back to that because pacifism plays a key role in the teachings of the church at various points. And then there's a man named George Pojebrad, who is an important nobleman who eventually becomes the king of Bohemia. And at first, he aids the Moravian Church, the Unitas Fratrum, but then later he persecutes them, okay? So in this period after Huss, there's this sort of settling down, and some people are thinking about things that give birth to what we know as the Unitas Fratrum. And before I get into that, I'm going to pause and ask if there are questions.
I guess, Greg, one question I have is that period after Huss' death until they broke away, was most of that in Prague, the people there in Prague?
Yeah, so after Huss dies, it really is, it's the people of Prague who rise up because it's a very large city, so it's large numbers of people. But Huss, and once again, here's where, if we had 39 hours to talk about this, we'd go into much greater detail. But Huss had been, he sort of went into voluntary exile, and he wandered around in the countryside and just preached under trees. And so when we go to the Czech Republic and we take tours there, there's still a tree that Huss preached under. There's a 500-year-old tree. Wow. And we go there, and so all the rural people in the countryside, they loved him because he came out. He wasn't just one of those city boys. They knew that he had come from sort of their area, and he preached out there about the corruptions of the church. So he was very popular there. So it's all throughout this area that you see people who were trying to enact these reforms that Huss preached. Primarily in Prague, but it spreads elsewhere into the countryside. I had a question about the word orthography. So especially when I'm putting up Czech names, sometimes I'll have a name that looks really weird, and then you'll have another name that looks only half weird, because it'll be like George Pojebrad. And so George, I recognize that. Huss invented the way of making all those funny marks above letters, and helps. So like I said, I'll back up a slide to show you a couple of them when I turn it back on, because the Czech language is really, really a tricky, funky language. And he developed all these, if you've ever had any French, you know that they've got some extra marks above some of their letters. And so he's the one that invented that. So orthography's a word for sort of ways of writing alphabets. Other questions before we move on?
I do, please.
Yes.
So as they were having their discussions and the talks of how to go about reform, were these having to be held in secret? Were they being persecuted, or could they have open discussions?
So initially, these are very open discussions because, like I said, there's sort of a history of the church reforming itself. So if you know anything about Catholicism and like the orders within the Catholic Church, you may have heard people talk about, you know, Dominicans or Jesuits or Franciscans and, you know, all these different orders. These were essentially reforming movements And so, like I said, the church had a long history of being able to do that. So saying we need to do something different, that was sort of common practice. What was different was that, but there were also people who said, we need to reform things, and the Catholic Church would go, no, we don't like your ideas, so we'll kill you. And that's where things like the Inquisition come in, right? So there were some reforms that were acceptable, some reforms weren't. Now the problem was, so if you suggested reform and the Catholic Church said no, well then you've got to be in secret. And there are times that the Moravian Church really does worship in secret, but at this point things are really sort of out in the open. Great question. Other questions?
Riddick, I have one. Going back to what you said about communion and the laity would only receive the bread, was it men, women, and children, or who do you define as the laity?
Okay, at that point, laity is anybody that's not ordained. So that would be men, women, and children. And they would receive only the bread. And the reason for that was, as Catholic belief developed, it was the idea over time, the prevailing belief became that the bread was actually literally the body of Christ. And the wine was actually literally the blood of Christ. And people became concerned that they might spill the blood of Christ when they were drinking. And so some lay people actually asked not to take the cup because they didn't want to worry about spilling it and sort of, wasting Christ's blood. And so that was a request from the laity that some people said in the church, yes, that's okay. But then it sort of flipped, and the power structures within the church said, now no laity can take the cup because we don't want you to spill it, and only the clergy can have it. And so part of what that means is, for hundreds of years, the only people who got to take the wine at communion were men. No, because the Catholic Church did not ordain women. So it was only men who got to drink the cup at communion for centuries. So you can see it's not only a clergy lay thing, but it's also a gender issue in terms of like those kind of dynamics as well. Other questions? All right. All right. I will dive back into the PowerPoint. There we go. And there you can see like that sort of third dot down, that C has that funny crown on top of it. Down here, we see other words that have those. That's sort of the orthography that John Huss invented to help Czechs speak their own language. All right, so here's what happened. In 1457, a small group of people who'd been influenced by those other people that I just mentioned, they decided that they needed to start a church of their own. And the fact that we as a church still exist is just an incredible, it's really almost a miracle, because for us to exist, like I said, the Catholic Church, had been the only game in town for a millennium. And then out of that, this small group of people separated and called themselves the Hussites. And they were able to fight off the most powerful army in Europe just to be able to exist. And out of those Hussites, there was a group called the Utraquists. And out of the Utraquists, the Unitas Fratrum was born on March 1st, 1457. So March 4th, 1457, the Unitas Fratrum says, we really need to have a church of our own to be able to believe and practice the way we think Christ meant for the church to be. And this goes back to, I can't remember, maybe it was Dottie's question. by 1461, at this point, because we separated, at that point, some people started experiencing persecution. And sometimes things sort of had to go underground from here on out, okay? Prior to this, everything was sort of out in the open. But after this, sometimes we've got some more religious acceptance, but a lot of times not. Okay. In 1467, we took an additional step and we started ordaining our own priests within the Moravian Church. Prior to that, we tried to rely on good priests who were within the Utriquist Church or who were Catholic and actually sympathetic to the cause, sympathetic to the beliefs of the Unitas Fratrum. It's important to note that since our founding, the Unitas Fratrum has always tried to think and do what was right, but we've always recognized that we might be wrong. So when the Moravian Church ordained its first priests, there was the idea that we needed to have 3 priests to serve the Moravian Church. And so they came up with a list of 9 names of people they thought could be good priests within the Moravian Church. And the decision was that they would select 3 by lot. But like I said, these people thought this seems like a good idea to us, but it might not be what God wants us to do. So they, in addition to those 9 names, they also threw in 3 blank pieces of paper, saying that if God doesn't want us to have a separate priesthood, we'll draw those 3 blank pieces of paper and we won't ordain our own priests. So there was the option that God could tell them, nope, this is not what I want. And they pulled these 3 names, people named Matthias, Thomas, and Elias, and they became the first Moravian ministers. Let's see, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So one thing to note about those three ministers, they would not have been university educated. They would have been simple members of this community that decided they needed to start a separate church. So that's sort of that thing I was talking about, that I didn't say this. They felt the easiest way to live the life that Christ wanted them to live was to get out of the cities, to move out into the countryside where they could live simple lives, where they wouldn't be tempted by the vices of the city, by greed, where they wouldn't get caught up in the violence of warfare. So they wanted to move out to the cities. So they led this very sort of common, simple life. They had uneducated pastors at first. They did not believe in serving in the government or taking oaths because the Sermon on the Mount was really important to them. And so you're not supposed to swear oaths according to the Sermon on the Mount. So not swearing an oath meant that you couldn't hold a political office. You wouldn't charge interest if you lent money, these kinds of things. So this was this simple life that the Unitas Fratrum founded. And I saw the question, we changed the name to the Moravian Church about 450 years later. And we'll talk more about why we did that. But for a long time, the church was known simply as the Unitas Fratrum, or in German as the Brudergemeinde, which is sort of the German translation of that. So like I said, the Moravian Church starts out in this rural, sort of uneducated, leery of the powerful, not wanting to be associated with government or power. And that's how they spend sort of their first 50 years. And then this guy named Luke of Prague comes along. And he changes things. As I said earlier, the Moravians were fearful of power. And so they did not want nobility in the Unitas Fratrum. As a matter of fact, if you were a noble person who wanted to join the unity, you had to renounce your noble titles and you had to give up your wealth. So Luke argued that, maybe actually it is good to have some people who know how to work within the government, who might be able to argue for us and advocate for us within the government. So Luke sort of changed our relationship with power. Luke also argued, well, I really think we need educated clergy who go to the universities and study how to study the Bible and know how to lead. So he sort of argued that we need to change sort of who can be in the unity. He was also, he recognized that, yes, there's some advantages to living in rural communities, but what if your calling in life was not to be a farmer or, to raise cattle or whatever, but you had, you wanted to be a potter. Maybe you could be a potter in your local villages, but if you really wanted to make it, you probably needed to go to the city where you had more people to sell your pots to. So maybe it's okay to live in a city. So these were some of the changes that Luke argued for within the church. Luke was in correspondence with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So we had, like I said, where originally the Moravian Church, the Unitas Fraternum, separated from churches. Now they begin to look for correspondence with other churches. He actually made a trip to Rome, the heart of the enemy, the Roman Catholic Church. And he made a trip to Rome to see maybe, are there good things about the Catholic Church that we should be holding on to or learning from? And as I mentioned, this is the time period later in Luke's life that Martin Luther was starting his work and John Calvin was starting his work. And he was in correspondence with these other reformers. So rather than saying the unity needs to run off in the country and hide itself, we actually need to be in correspondence. We need to be working with and learning from others. I've already sort of mentioned there was a change related to sort of politics and the sort of agreement that maybe it's helpful to know some people who are able to help protect us or help us do things. Another thing that Lucas argued for was we need to print hymnals, and it's okay for them to be beautiful hymnals. And so he sort of had this recognition of sort of the role of sort of beauty as a way to praise God. And that was sort of different from what had come before him, where everything was supposed to be simple. So Lucas of Prague, like I said, argued for a lot of changes. So excuse me a second, I'm going to skip ahead because I'm aware of our time and I don't want to try people's patience. And I promised I would talk about the essentials. So I'm going to get to those right now. So these are the things that Luke of Prague argued were absolutely essential. Because as we said, Luke was arguing for changing some things, but these are the things he said were absolutely essential. These are the things that are the core of the faith. And if you've got these things, you've got a church. And so sort of another way of thinking about these is if the Inquisition burns your Bible and your church, are you still a Christian? And the argument would be, well, yes, right? Because I can still be a Christian even if somebody takes these things away from me. And another way of thinking about it, sort of putting in a modern context, if we're not able to get together in our sanctuary and worship like you at King love to do and hear the choir and sing together and do the things that you love to do, are you still a Christian? Well, yeah. So part of what that helps us understand is that it's not going to church necessarily that makes us a Christian. If COVID keeps us from taking communion, we can still be a Christian, even though communion's very important, it's not essential. So if we've just sort of said these kinds of things aren't absolutely essential, what are? And here they are. These are things that God does. And if God doesn't do these things, nothing else really matters. That's why they're essential. And they're God's works, not our works. right? That's why they're essential. God does them. It doesn't depend on us. God does them. And these are the things that God does. God creates, God redeems, and God sanctifies or sustains or blesses, makes us holy. There's several different ways to talk about that last one, but those are the three big things. God creates, God redeems, and God sustains. So that means that the creation of God is an ongoing essential, right? It's not what we think about creation that's essential. So, if somebody wants to believe that the earth is 6,000 years old and God created literally in 6 days, or if we want to believe that, God created this universe that's been spinning out for billions of years, it's not our understanding that's the essential, but it's the fact that God does it that is essential. Because if God doesn't create, nothing really matters. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. It's also important to note that God is continuing to create. It's not that God just did stuff, rested on the Sabbath, and then said, okay, fellows, I'm done. Y'all handle it from here. No, creation is something that God continues to do. I'm going to skip over this. We might get to this a little bit later. God redeems. God saves souls. It's a gift of God. And if God doesn't save, then we're not saved. So once again, it's essential in that God does it. And if God doesn't do it, nothing else really matters. This means that Satan has been defeated. It means that our life has changed because of what God has been doing in the world and is doing in the world. The one who makes us, the one who created us, saves us out of love for us and for God's own sake. God saves us because God loves us and wants us for his own. And then this last one, like I said, there's several ways to talk about it. God blesses. So the Holy Spirit's working in us. God's blessing us. God's sanctifying us, setting us apart. And it's nothing that we can do on our own works. Not on our own effort, but it's stuff that God makes possible for us to do. And if we see the fruit of the Spirit, then there's good signs that the Holy Spirit's working in us. If we are experiencing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, if we're experiencing that, that's a sign that God's doing this essential thing within us. And anywhere we see those things, we believe that the Spirit's present, and we can bear witness to the fact that God is continuing to bless. So, as I said, when Mark asked the question, the essentials are really pretty easy because there's two sets of them, and we just hit the first one. God creates, God redeems, and God sustains or blesses. We'll sort of skip over that a little bit. And then here's the second set of essentials. So God does this stuff, and God invites us to respond to God's work in three ways. We can respond with faith, love, and hope. And these things are really interconnected, right? So when we respond with faith and love, it means we live a hopeful life. When we can respond in hope, it means we're able to love. When we respond in faith, it means that we trust in God's love and our ability to share that with other people, right? So these things sort of work together. And that's why I say essentially there are two essentials. One essential deals with God. God creates, redeems, and sustains. And another essential deals with we respond with faith, love, and hope. So there's a lot more at the end of that I could have talked about. There's a lot more in the middle of it that I skipped over. But like I said, we don't have 39 hours to talk about all this. We'll come back and we're going to talk about this more next time. Because we're going to talk about, okay, if those are the essentials, well, what about everything else, right? How do we make sense of everything else? And that's what we're going to talk about next time. So Everybody can repeat after me, right? There are two essentials. One essential is on the part of God, and God does three things. What are they? God creates, God redeems, and God sustains, right? I want to see everybody's lips moving. What is it that God does? God creates, God redeems, and God sustains. All right? So that's that first set of three. The second set of three is, as humans, we respond with faith, love, and hope. Right? Faith, love, and hope. So, Mark, there's your answer. Those are the essentials. That's what we got to hold on to. And everything else is stuff that we're trying to make sense of. Okay? All right, questions or comments?
I think, one thing I was thinking about as one of the essentials of hope, what happens when your hope is running low? In this time as the world is turned upside down. How do you find, how to recharge through stuff like this?
Right, and that's a great question. And I think part of what makes the situation that we're in with COVID so difficult is normally when our hope's running low, what do? We get together with people. We talk to people. We have meals together. We go do something fun. What is it that we can't do because of COVID? We can't get together. We can't see people face to face. We can't have meals together. We can't go have fun together. So I think that's part of what makes this time so challenging. But, what we can do is what we're doing right now, right? So we're finding hope by the fact that, okay, yeah, we can't get together the way we normally do, but this is better than nothing. And, I don't get to see my boys the way I'd normally do, but I'd much rather talk to them on Zoom than not get to see them at all, right? So I think, and part of what we've got to remember is our human hope is a response to what God does. So if we really believe that God creates and redeems and sustains, I can find hope that God's going to do something, even if my hope in humanity is running a little low, right? Because normally, and we experience God through one another. That's part of being a church. We're the body of Christ, right? We're God's hands and feet and eyes and ears and all that kind of stuff. And so we experience God through one another. But when we can't do that the way we normally do, then we really remember, okay, it's the fact that God loves me. The fact that God has redeemed me. The fact that God can sustain me even when my hope's running low. I'm going to really focus there right now. And the rest of us can go, okay, how can we respond in love? Dottie's asking questions about, man, my hope seems to be running low. How can I lovingly reach out to my sister and say, is there anything I can do that can help you hope through this time? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, for me, Reddick, the two essentials, is that, I guess I kind of look at it as more of a recent teaching we have in the church now. I know for me, for years, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, I always refer to one of the bishops of our church, John Grenfell, who wrote a booklet called Becoming a Member of the Moravian Church. And he listed out, I think, like 7 essentials of the Moravian Church, which, a lot's included in this. But I think he also included things like, like God is creator of the world. We as human beings are sinful and need a savior. Our savior is Jesus. That's the redemption. I guess I always appreciated too, though, he said one of the essentials is that we believe in the second coming of Jesus, not how that's going to be. That's a non-essential, but the essential that Jesus is coming back. So I don't know, to me, that was a pretty good guideline, but now I feel like I have to, in a way, kind of teach something else now. If I teach the essentials, is that just...
All right, so Doug, you bring out a great point. And so this way of talking about the essentials is actually 400 years older than the sort of essentials that Grenfell spelled out. Mm-hmm. And so part of what we're going to talk about, particularly in our third time together, is why did people sort of move away from what I've shared with you tonight and then begin to develop some other things? And there's some reasons for that that we'll talk about in a little bit greater depth then. And like Doug said, that's what I grew up with. I remember, but I did college ministry for a while before Doug did it. And we, that was when David Letterman was doing the top 10 lists, and so like there were the top 8 essentials of the Moravian Church, and people made t-shirts of it and stuff like that. So I sort of grew up hearing there were 8 essentials. And I think a lot of them are pretty compatible, but I think Grenfell might spell out some things a little more specifically than the original scheme that I shared with you tonight talks about. So, like you'll notice, I didn't mention sin, and you talked about Grenfell talks about a little more specifically about human sin, but the idea that Christ or that God redeems, sort of inherent in that notion is the idea that there's sin that needs to be dealt with. So it didn't spell it out, but they're not mutually exclusive either. And I think, like I said, the doctrine of the second coming is not specifically spelled out in the essentials that I presented to you tonight. But that idea of redemption, that second coming really is sort of like the wrapping it all up, the ultimate redeeming of everything, right? And that's part of what we can have hope in, is this belief that someday everything's going to be all right. May not feel like it when, I look at the COVID numbers and things are all rising, they're going in the wrong direction, and that doesn't feel very hopeful. But my belief is that someday, through Christ, everything's going to be all right. Yeah. So Doug, that's a good point. Like I said, we're going to look at sort of where those developments came from, and then also why people have sort of suggested that we make a return to this older understanding of things. Other questions or comments? Dottie, was that another question? I saw your mute come off. Okay.
Nope,
All right.
I was just going to say how much I've enjoyed seeing everyone. And, as you were talking about different things, I would have music going through my mind. Dusty and Virginia and Paula, did y'all sing Fruit of the Spirit when he was talking about that?
Yeah,
And
so actually, that's an interesting lead in, because part of what we're going to talk about next time is like for a lot of Moravians, music is so important. We were talking earlier in the virtual choir that Mark's been in on, and you're talking about music, and I know Doug had played and sung a lot, and music's just in our Moravian DNA. And so it's interesting to note that music is not an essential. And so we'll talk about sort of where that shows up. And when you, like I said, sometimes our biggest fights are really over things that aren't essential. So think about the fights that we have over church music sometimes. I grew up playing trombone. I played in, the Easter band and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up with that sort of the Moravian brass tradition. And, there's some people who really think that's old and outdated and don't like that, and we need to be doing more with guitars and all that kind of stuff. Well, I also play guitar, and, I enjoy camp music and stuff like that. And, so I can sort of handle both of those, but don't give me any Christian rap. I can't handle that. So, but within the scheme of these things, music's not an essential. So it means we've got to be willing sort of to put up with each other a little bit sometimes. I like my things, and you like your way of singing things or hearing music. And since it's not essential, how do we learn to work together to let you have what you like and I can have what I like? And how do we work those things out? So that's where, like, so next week we'll talk a little bit more about how we deal with those kinds of things. And other things that sort of fit in that category are, does the preacher have to wear a coat and tie, or is a clerical collar, or a preaching robe, or all these kinds of things that sometimes people fight about. We in this scheme of things, we sort of say, yeah, but we can understand why people have preferences and opinions, but ultimately they're not as important as these other things.
Any particular advice of how to get people to see it not being an essential?
Well, to be honest, so I think churches can handle whatever music they can make. So if there are people within the church who want to do something different, that really needs to swell up from within the church. I think the difficulty is when some people want something and it seems like an outside in position. And so for about 7 years, I was a member of Christ the King Moravian Church in Durham. And we probably had, I would say that we had the best blended worship going. And it was because it was all the same musicians. We had a bunch of us who'd grown up, and, I know Doug plays alto horn, so he knows the Moravian, the Moravian chorale tradition. We had a bunch of us who grew up doing that, and we'd play our Moravian chorales, and we had a piano that played along with that. And then we'd put our horns on horn stands, and we'd pick up guitars, and we'd sing stuff that we sang at camp and that was sort of popular in the contemporary music circles. And among the musicians, it wasn't like, I don't like your music, because then it would be like saying, well, I don't like my music either, because it was all the same musicians. We just played different kinds of music. And so it was sort of all ours. So I think if people are interested in expanding the kind of music, it has to be sort of really indigenous. It has to be sort of coherent with the congregation itself. And I would argue that the best way to introduce it is get your kids to do it. Because nobody's going to go, oh, I love my grandchild, but I hate that music they did. They're going to go, oh, they're up there singing. So and drag your kids into it, I think is the.
I know for me, I had maybe a different situation when I was in Asheville, North Carolina. We were trying to get a Moravian church going there. And we had probably about 5 different churches represented there, from people who were who are living now in Asheville, trying to get a Moravian church going. And when it came time to what the deaners wear for Love Feast, it seemed like there were 3 or 4 different things. They've got to have black skirts. They've got to wear doilies on their head, things such as that. We were able to compromise and find out what worked for us. But, some people can really hold on to what they grew up with their traditions and all. And you just have to work through it.
Right. And those are the kinds of things that, like I said, those are incidentals. Right. They can vary by incident. So, if the incident is I show up at King Moravian and they're wearing this, well, that's fine. And if I go to Home Moravian Church and they're wearing something different, that's okay. And if I go to, somewhere in Nicaragua and they're wearing something different, that's okay, because those vary by incident. And the difficulty is some people think those are the essentials. So that's why I said, if we can really help people focus on these are the essentials, not those, it doesn't mean that, I can understand why you want to see people dressed the way you've seen it all your life, and I can understand why that's in tension with somebody else's way. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the comment, try to keep the main thing the main thing.
Yep. And that's what the essentials help us do, right? And that's why for a lot of Moravians, it is confusing because we've spent so long, we said in essentials, unity. What are the essentials? Don't know. So it's hard to keep the main thing when we don't know what they are.
We're learning tonight. We appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
Let me ask you about your energy levels. Was tonight too long in terms of how long I talked?
Not for me.
Okay.
No,
I could
you
keep
keep
going.
going on.
I can keep going too.
I have to say, I love to teach. I'm actually sweating here. I sort of work sweat talking about this stuff. So I love to do it. And I'm really used to teaching sort of in 3-hour blocks. That's how we do things at the seminary. I know you're not up for a 3-hour block on a Tuesday night. So like I said, I want to make sure that we're trying to talk about as much stuff as we can, but I also don't want people worn out and going, I'm not sure I want to do that again. So just wanted to get a check for people's sort of sense of things.
Well, thank you. It was very good.
It was very good.
Yes.
All
I feel
right.
like I learned so much.
Like I said, I'm going to send Doug a PowerPoint that's got everything that I talked about tonight and some stuff, like I said, that I skipped over. You know, you'll have those and you can look at that if you want to. And I'm going to put my email address in the chat box real quick, so that if anybody wants to shoot, you know, feel free to email me any questions or anything like that.
I thought you did an excellent job breaking things down and simplifying, and it was very easy to follow.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I'm aware that, you know, I love to talk about this stuff. And, you know, I'm aware that at times I can just assume people know stuff that I know. And you know, all of a sudden you can get people with the deer in the headlights look or glassy eyes and all that kind of stuff. So, so feel free, you know, ask me to break stuff down further, go back and say more about that. I didn't quite follow you. Because like I said, I'm aware that I can get sort of down in the weeds, and there are lots of weeds to go into. So my address is Weber, and that is Weber with one B, R2 at moravian.edu.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful spending time with you and my church family this evening.
It's good to see you.
Glad to give y'all an excuse to get together.
Thank you so much, Riddick. We'll certainly look forward to the other sessions. I will say this, just to let you know, this is a 4-week or 4 sessions, but we're really stretching it out to 5 weeks. And one of the reasons that we're doing that, just to let you all know tonight, is that the second Tuesday of the month is our usual scheduled joint board meeting and separate elders and trustees. And instead of trying to reschedule that, and several of you are on the board or will be coming on the board, we thought we would just delay this 1 week. So really, it's going to be like a 5-week period with 4 sessions. And then once again, Riddick, we appreciate what you're doing for us. I'll just continue to get the word out. We may have some more next time. I think there are some who said that they could not come tonight or be a part of it, but we're interested in seeing the recordings. So I really appreciate the great group we have tonight. So thank you all so much.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Keep the questions coming, and look forward to seeing y'all next week.
Okay.
Bye.
We'll close it out then. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. Drive safely. Thank you all.